All right, hello everybody. Welcome back. Today we're going to be covering lesson 2 in our series on how to become a percussionist from scratch, all right? And I decided to title this one The Math Behind It All because today we're going to be focusing on the math behind rhythm. All right, so this is one of my favorite lessons to teach, definitely second to time signatures, which we'll be covering next lesson. But I wanted to begin this lesson specifically by talking about different note names. All right, so before we even talk about what these things mean, we have to give them a name. All right, so starting at the very top on our left hand side, we have this circle looking thing called a whole note. All right, so I'm not going to say what any of them mean just yet. I'm just going to name them. Next up, we have a half note. A half note looks like a whole note with a stick coming out of the top of it, just right here, just like that. We call that a stem. A quarter note is next. A quarter note. And the quarter note looks like a half note, but it is filled in. All right, so it looks just like that. We have an eighth note, which looks like a quarter note with this strange flag sticking out of the top of it. We call it a flag. Eighth note. And then we have a 16th note. 16th notes are the exact same thing as eighth notes, except they have two flags. So they have 2 flags. All right, now we have these things at the bottom. These are our notes up here at the top, and these are our rests. So these are rests. Rests have the exact same value as their respective notes, and they're called the exact same thing. So in all senses, they're the same as the note equivalent, except you don't play when you encounter a rest. You just stay silent. So I'll name them. Here we go. So this one that looks like it's a hole in the ground, remember that? It looks like it's a hole in the ground. So let's say this here is the ground. This is a hole in the ground. This is called our whole note. Or sorry, my apologies, our whole rest. This is our half rest. This is our quarter rest. Eighth rest. And finally, our 16th rest. 16th rest. These have the exact same values, okay? So our eighth notes and our eighth rests have exactly the same duration, just as our quarter note and our quarter rest, exactly the same. So when we get into note durations, keep in mind that they're going to have the exact same value. And I'm going to re-explain that when we get to it. Now, before we move on, all right, before we go any further, I want to talk about notation a little bit. And notation just means how we write notes. So let's say we had a series of eighth notes. They look kind of like this. All right, so let's say we had 4 eighth notes. It doesn't matter what they're worth. We just want to look at what they look like. Now, these look kind of messy. They look a little confusing, and importantly, they look kind of like quarter notes. And that's an issue because if we're reading music really quickly, we want to be sure of what we're reading. And if we look at an eighth note, we might confuse it with a quarter note. So to fix that confusion, what composers and people who write music actually do is they connect the flags together. So they end up with something, they end up with something looking like this. Man, Notability is really letting me down here. All right, there we go. That looks good. And it looks something like this. That looks so bad, I'm just going to do it again. It looks something like this. Here we go. Where they basically connect all the stems. Like that. Okay? So these two mean exactly the same thing. You just connect the stems. And by connecting them together, it just looks a little bit neater. So let's say we have 16th notes. Okay? We can connect them the exact same way just by doing this. Now when we have 16th notes, it's important to add the double connection. The double stem at the very top, because that signifies that they're eighth notes, that they're 16th notes, and the 1 signifies that they're eighth. So this is 8, this is 16th. Also, if you question, we can also connect eighth notes and 16th notes together. So if we were to turn this we can actually turn this into something that looks like this. Right? So these two are the 16th notes, and this is the 8th note. All right, so here we have a diagram showing the relationship of all of our notes. At the top we have our whole note. I'm just going to mark it in right now. We have our whole note. And at the bottom we have our 16th note. All right. This tree shows the relationship between all of the notes. And the first thing we have to know going into this is that all notes, no matter what note you're talking about, is named relative to the whole note. And that is very, very important, because once we understand what that means, it allows us to read rhythms so much easier. And I'm going to show you exactly what I mean. So here is our half note. We remember this from the first part of the video where we talked about the different note names. So we can recognize this as a half note. It is called a half note because its value is worth half of a whole note. And you can see here that there are 1, 2 half notes for every whole note. So in other words, this whole note can be divided into 2 half notes. Thus, each half note is worth half of a whole note. And we can continue this pattern. Each half note can be divided into two quarter notes. Right? Here's one quarter note. Here's one quarter note. Here's a second quarter note. And since there are 2 half notes in a whole note, that means there are 4 quarter notes in one whole note. Each whole note is worth a quarter of a whole note. Okay? So if I were to ask you how many quarter notes are there in a whole note, there are 4 quarter notes in a whole note. And it's the same thing with eighth notes. I'm going to count them all out for you right now, okay? There's a lot of them. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 eighth notes, 6, 7, and 8 eighth notes. Each quarter note can be divided into 2 eighth notes. This means that there are a total of 8 eighth notes in a whole note, meaning there are, 8 eighth notes in a whole note. That means each eighth note is an eighth of a whole note. Same thing with 16th notes. I'm not going to count them all out, but you can trust me that there are 16. Each eighth note can be divided into 2 16th notes, just like that. And since there are 8 eighth notes, multiply that by 2, we get 16 16th notes. Now, do you guys see the pattern? There is a math pattern here, and I was hoping we'd see it by now. And actually, I'll just give it to you guys. So starting at our whole note, we can divide the duration of a whole note by 2. So we can divide by 2, and we get whole note, and we get half notes. Remember, a half note is worth half of a whole note. We take that one step further. We can divide again by 2. And now we have quarter notes. A whole note divided into 2 is a half note. Divide that again into 2, we get a quarter note. Divide that again into 2, and we get an eighth note. And finally, again, and we get a 16th note. And this pattern can keep going until we can't divide anymore, which is pretty much an infinite amount. So that is the relationship between all the notes. But I truly believe that the best way to learn is to practice. So what we have next are some practice problems that'll hopefully help us wrap our heads around this idea. As promised, here are some practice problems that I think are really helpful. Let's start with this one right here, our first one. Here we have a series of 4 quarter notes, and the question wants us to indicate by using one note the equivalent to the following groups of notes. So we want to transform these 4 quarter notes into one note. So we have to ask ourselves, can we do anything to these quarter notes? Well, if we are armed with our tree here, we see that 2 quarter notes can be combined to make one half note. So let's do that. So let's push these 2 together and push these 2 together. All right, and when we're beginning, let's take it slow. We'll do it step by step. So we can very easily turn 2 quarter notes into a half note, just like we see right here. All right, 1 quarter note, 2 quarter notes can be pushed together to make a half note. Then the exact same relationship is seen with half notes. Here's one half note, here's a second half note, and they can be pushed together to make a whole note. So we can push these together and we make a whole note. All right, and that is the right answer, so let's give ourselves a big old check mark and we can move on. This one's a bit trickier. Remember what I said up here, how we can join notes together by connecting their stems if they have them, connecting their flags. Well, I'm just going to break this apart to make it a bit more clear to see what we're dealing with here. These are 16th notes. This is an 8th note. Okay? So what we have here is this, 2 16th notes plus a quarter note, plus an 8th note. Okay, so what can we do with this? Well, we can't really do anything with the 8th note as it is, but we definitely can do something with 2 16th notes. Remember, 2 16th notes can be combined just like this to make an 8th note. To make an 8th note. So let's do that together. Let's push these together, and we're left with 2 8th notes. And I hope this is looking familiar because we just did it. 2 8th notes, as I proved right here, can be used to make a quarter note. That is not a quarter note. Can be used to make a quarter note. Awesome. Isn't this so cool? I think it's cool. All right. I hope we understand that. If not, it's all about this tree. This is the percussionist's ultimate weapon, okay? This tree will give you the answers to everything you need to know. All right. Question 2. Write out other notes that equal the same value as the notes given. Okay, I'm going to do this one, and I'm going to tell you right now there is an almost infinite amount of answers to this. So I'm going to show you my thought process and how we can approach this kind of problem. At the most basic level, we can represent a whole note by 2 half notes. Remember, the first thing I taught you guys, one whole note can be split off into 2 half notes, just like that. So let's do that. We have 2 half notes, just like this. All right? But maybe you want to be a bit more complicated. Let's refer back to our tree. I'm just going to make it here. What can we split half notes into? Well, we know that there are 2 quarter notes that go into a half note. We saw that using our tree. So what I can do is, if I want to make this a bit more complicated, I can erase one of these half notes and replace it with 2 quarter notes, just like what I'm doing now. And this has the exact same value. If I wanted to go a step further, I could replace the quarter note with 2 8th notes. Do you guys remember that relationship? 1 quarter note can be broken up into 2 8th notes. So I can erase this quarter note and write in 2 8th notes, just like this. And this is all the same thing. This still equals a whole note. All right, and I can keep going. I can split this 8th note into 16th notes. I can split that 16th note into 32nd notes, and I can keep going on and on forever. But, at some point it gets a little ridiculous. So let's just leave it here. I hope you guys saw how I split. You can just split notes off and add in equal values. It's just like math. It's just like math, and that's why rhythm is so cool. Now, I'm just going to do 2 of these. Because these are pretty much just look at the tree and answer the question. So I'm just going to choose one at random. I'm going to do this one, and I'm going to do this one. So these ones are all about notes. These ones are all about rests. Now in this video, I didn't talk too much about rests. Just know that you could replace all of these note symbols with their rest values. So let's say I want to talk about rests. All I would have to do is do this. Get rid of this half note here and make it a half rest. And the tree is exactly the same. I can't draw the quarter note I think it looks something like that. I forget. It's something like this. It looks like that. I can't draw it. I'm not very good at art, as you've probably noticed by watching these videos. But I could replace all of these notes with their respective rests, and it would be the exact same table. So let's proceed with that in mind. There are blank eighth notes in a quarter note. This is just asking us how many eighth notes in a quarter note. We can just look at our tree. There are 1, 2 eighth notes in one quarter note. And that's the answer. There are 2 eighth notes in one quarter note. There are blank 16th rests in a whole rest. Okay, this is a good question. So let's imagine we replace all of these 16th notes with 16th rests. Remember, they look something like this. They're right here. They look like this. These two things have the exact same value. So the question is, how many 16th rests fit into a whole rest? Okay, well, we just have to count. There are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, and 16. There are 16 16th rests in a whole note. Just like I said, guys, all notes and rests, I should have said that before, all notes and rests are named relative to the whole note / whole rest. Okay? If you take one thing away, it's gotta be this whole page here. This rhythm tree is the key. This is the percussionist's secret weapon. So I'm just going to quickly fill this in so we can get our checkpoint, our check mark. And guys, that's all I have to teach you today. I hope you learned something, because I really love teaching this class. And next time we're going to talk about, I can just chalk it in real quick. Lesson 3, it's going to be all about time signatures. Time signatures. This is my favorite class to teach of all time. I hope you guys learned something today, and I'll see you next time.